All right, welcome everyone. Thank you everyone for being here for the Nonprofit Partnerships Webinar Communications and Fundraising during COVID-19. We appreciate you all joining us today, and for some of our other webinars that we've been putting together. TNP remains committed to supporting your organization through this pandemic and through beyond. So we do remain committed to providing your capacity building needs during this time, and we look forward to seeing you again in person someday, but thank you for joining us online today. We wanted to thank the Josephine Gumbiner Foundation as well as the Port of Long Beach for sponsoring this webinar today and making it possible for TNP to provide it to you for free. And I hope that you'll be able to join us for our upcoming webinars. We'll actually have two next week. On Monday, we will be covering an overview for the Families First Act, as well as the Paycheck Protection Program and the Economic Injury Disaster Loans. So we'll be having that on Monday. And on Thursday, we'll be covering a little bit about what your board of directors can be doing during this time to support your organization. So hopefully you'll be hearing about those later today, and hopefully we'll be looking forward to seeing you next week for these. For now, I want to welcome Richard Tollefson with the Phoenix Philanthropy Group. He's actually the founder and president of the group, founded in 2004. Richard holds over 30 years experience in fundraising and communications, and some of you may remember him or recognize him as the presenter for our annual Giving USA program we hold in June. That he'll be joining us in June again this year online. So without further ado, Richard, I'd like to toss it to you. And just to remind everybody, if you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A box. We will try to get to them during the presentation. And if we don't, we'll try and get follow-ups to you afterwards. So Richard.
All right. Well, great to be with you all virtually. And I hope you're all healthy and safe today. It's a challenging time for us all, and we need to really figure out how we move forward hold on, I'm just having a little trouble with there we go. How we move forward with our fundraising and activity in this time. So what we're going to talk about today is the challenge for everyone in the nonprofit sector, and the idea that it shouldn't result in a stubborn devotion to business as usual, nor should it force us to really halt our fundraising activity. Instead, through appropriate commitment and reflection, renewal, and bold action, and effective communications, we can move forward at this time. So as we look at our communications, we want to talk today about communications and innovation, how to maintain and enhance your important relationships with your board, with your donors, with your community members and others. We'll hope to build upon some of the conversation that you had last week with Janet Levine, and leading into some of the conversation that you'll have next week. Particularly with regard to the stimulus law and other things like that, or stimulus bill, other things like that. So we'll jump right into it. And as Christina said, if you have questions, please post those. If it's particularly relevant, she'll interrupt me, and we'll answer the questions at that time, or we'll also leave some time at the end of the discussion today with regard to additional questions or issues or best practice or challenges that you want to share. This is learning from everybody, so feel free to share anything also that you want. So in a communication that we sent out to our clients, we talked about key points that we felt were particularly important in this time. And so I'm going to walk through what those components are, give you a little bit of explanation and overview of each of those components, then cite some examples of our clients, current clients, former clients who I think are doing particularly well or may have some challenges in a particular area. So kind of not only learning the concepts, but some real life examples. Our clients range from major universities, colleges and universities, to human service organizations, arts and culture, to environment, kind of everything in between. We're focused primarily in the Southwest United States, but we work nationally and internationally, and at any time maintain a portfolio of about 25 to 30 clients. So the budgets of our clients can range anywhere from about 800,000 to $1 million up to 3 billion is our largest client right now. So I'll be able to share with you some reflections from different size organizations in different industries or sectors. Hopefully that will be helpful for you. So first, be consistent with your regard to your communications, and that's both internal and external communications. Everyone and how you're addressing and handling the issues of COVID-19 and demonstrating sensitivity to the needs and concerns of your employees, your volunteers, your audience, and your community overall. It may come from a position of strength, it may come from a position of need, and we certainly shouldn't forget some key people that we need to communicate with, and oftentimes, sometimes, board members or those who are the closest to us might not be always top of mind to communicate with. So in some cases, you have financial strength where organizations have reserves and they're not too concerned about the issues going on right now with regard to their financial bottom line. But more organizations are certainly experiencing financial vulnerability. And in every case, or in most cases, we're addressing community need and constituent need. So building the story around that. And your conversations and communications should be multi-channel. You know, email, phone, text, website, mail, Zoom, whatever it may be that your audience is most comfortable with. And the segmentation of that message is also probably important. You want to communicate about your organization. You want to communicate about your service to the community. You also want to communicate about them with a personal touch to your messages and a personal outreach. So some examples of our clients that are doing particularly well or have some challenges. We're working with a foundation that raises money for 2 hospitals and 3 senior living communities, plus an extensive health and wellness program targeted towards senior citizens. And they have really been great about communicating externally to their audience with personal touch and outreach. I'm going to come back to them as an example a couple times in our discussion. But they've been really great about shifting gears, about talking to their external constituents, largely who are senior citizens living in either their living communities or in the community in general, in their own homes. And like most of us, they are sequestered in that space. So they've done a great job about reaching out personally to their constituents through the phone, primarily, and some email, but they missed some opportunities internally. And we were on a teleconference, the Zoom conference the day before yesterday, and they forgot to tell their internal staff that 3 members of one of the departments have come down with COVID-19. So that creates kind of a different situation for those employees who were, until a couple of weeks ago, working in the office with those folks. We have a former client that's a human services organization that deals with youth at risk. And I'm going to go into it in detail later, but they did an excellent email talking about the issues confronting their target audience and how you can help without directly asking for money. It was implied, but it wasn't explicit, and the result has been very strong. And then also another client who is a significant cultural organization that is very financially strong, and they have a significant reserve, And they also have a fund for innovation that they can tap into for new initiatives. But that reserve, certainly not all of our organizations have it. And they can come from a position of financial strength, but that doesn't mean they still don't have to raise money, because they've had to shift gears. Part of their mission is education, STEM education. They've had to shift gears into the way they provide their service. So they need funding for that, but the organization itself isn't threatened. And the CEO composed a brilliant letter that went out that talked first to their lead foundation donors and members of the board of trustees. And then it was segmented and communicated out in different waves. But it was a way to talk about strength and resiliency in a challenging time, but also had a fundraising message, again, for the new type of services they had to offer or the new method of delivery for those services. They did the same thing in 2008, 2009. We were working with them at that point when the market collapsed in the Great Recession of the 2008, 2009. And they came out also with a position of strength and communicated that, again, the good work of the board of trustees, the good work of the CEO, and the consistent support of the community in the past has made it the strong organization it is today. But we still have needs. So one way to look at your communication. And again, I think segmentation is particularly important, knowing who your target audience is going to be. The next one I want to talk about is be positive. And I've talked about our client who can speak from a position of financial strength. But looking at positive images and positive message from your work and your role in the community. Who are you helping now? How are you changing your roles, your responsibility, your programs and service to react to the current situation and provide service? You can still be positive and share concerns, and whether that's financial or service concerned, and really stating about here's what we're doing and how we're doing it. Here's the impact that we hope to have or anticipate that we will have, and what we need to be successful. So again, what are we doing? How are we doing it? What impact do we hope to have and anticipate having? And what do we need to be successful? And what we need to be successful in some cases is their continued financial support. We have one client in the environmental arena who sent out a message last week that showed the landscape, the parks that they are preserving and protecting. And it was a beautiful desert park, and the wildflowers were blooming. They had a video and they had photos of of how their work comes about, what they are doing in the environmental area. And in Arizona, at that point, we were still able to be out in our parks and take advantage of our parks and walk around. That's becoming more restrictive now, but it gave people some, respite from the challenges. And it really talked about hiking and wildflowers and why the organization's preservation and conservation work is so important. And then again, the cultural institution of speaking of financial strength, but they've had to shift. They're closed down, so they're not going to generate any revenue during this period of time. But their education and outreach programs, their STEM programs, are going to be delivered remotely. So how they train the trainers, how they work with teachers who are now teaching remotely, how they can provide direct service to those students who are working remotely is a message that they can tell at this time. The next would be sensitive to personal issues. And of course, that's ideal whether, it's in good times or bad. And personalized messages are always better than more generic messages. So I'm sure you already practice this to a degree, but I think now it's particularly important. With those vulnerable populations of seniors, those who have some medical issues, those who could be out of work or have reduced wages, all special markets that you speak to or constituent groups that you speak to that really require a special message. Now, you may not be able to segment, your email appeals or your mail appeals or other things like that, but you can at least put the message out there in more of a general context so that you are stating a degree of sensitivity and concern for those people who may be challenged. In the past, and in normal times, I'm not really familiar of the line in a fundraising appeal about whatever you can give. I think at this time that's okay, because you don't necessarily know the financial position. You don't necessarily know whether they have a friend or family member who has been impacted by this issue. So whatever you can give, whatever you can do is, I think, an appropriate message to send now. We had one client who they wanted to put in the email appeal that they were sending out and recommend that people give their stimulus checks to the organization as a way to give. I thought that was a terrible idea. If you are eligible for the stimulus checks, you're making less than $75,000 a year or $150,000 a year as a couple. Well, that is a significant amount of money, but should we be turning to that audience now and their stimulus checks? Because those checks may really, pay the rent for a month. They may buy the groceries for a month. And particularly for economically disadvantaged families, I don't think that that's the right message. So we turned it to tax credits. In Arizona, we have tax credits. They have been extended along with the filing deadline for taxes. So tax credits are an easy way to give. And now at this time, that's an opportunity to give to this organization. Another client, back to the cultural institution with which we work, they have a major ask on the table to a donor. It's a $10 million ask. And I was talking to the CEO about closing the gap, which we're going to talk about in a minute, or closing the loop. And she said, I am not calling the donor because she just lost a friend to COVID. I didn't know that. She did. Obviously, an important thing to take into consideration. But while that individual donor is not making any decisions now, not making any contributions now, her foundation still is. So the executive director of the foundation called about that $10 million ask and asked some more questions about whether that ask is still relevant given what's going on, or if they needed to adapt that ask at all, including more current use resource. So being aware of your donor's concern, that's COVID-19, but it's also the volatility in the stock market. And when donors have ambiguity, when they have volatility, it may be more difficult to make a decision. So if you are working with someone on a major gift, this is the time to be particularly sensitive to the different ways that major gifts can be funded. People may want to make decisions or may want to delay their decisions on gifts. They may want to slow down their payments on pledges. They may want to structure a gift with more complex assets, and they may want part of the gift to be legacy. So it's important for us to be able to shift from, say, that $1 million ask at $250,000 over 4 years. Maybe it becomes $200,000 over 5 years, or $100,000 of it is a planned gift and the rest is outright. Working with your donors to present those options, if they intimate that they need those options, is particularly important. And when in doubt about how they may want to structure a gift, or when in doubt about continuing to have the dialogue about contributions, just ask them. I mean, oftentimes we sit around and we strategize about our communications with our donors, or we fret about whether we should call them or not. In some cases, you just have to ask them. You ask them, would you like to continue this discussion about what the proposal on the table now, or should I call you in 2 months? So it's about continuing the conversation now, continuing it later, helping them structure major gifts in different ways. An example of what's going on with funders, and this is primarily institutional funders, they're changing the way they're giving as well. There's a major foundation that many of our clients has received support from, and they've made the decision that for the foreseeable future, they are not providing any investments for capital resources. So no money for new building projects, only current use for people in need. So the discussion with that foundation was, okay, the $2 million ask that we have for the new building and a naming opportunity in the new building, let's put that over here till the time is right to come back and have that conversation. But let us tell you about our work, in STEM education and the importance of kids continuing to learn. And there was some support that came along with that. You may also know about the Council on Foundations pledge. There are 512, probably more than that now. So say about 525, 550 foundations around the country that have signed this pledge with regard to how they will rethink their investments now, rethink their giving and grant guidelines. So let me just walk through a couple of the things that are on that Council of Foundations pledge. Major foundations will loosen or eliminate the restrictions on their current grants. This means also converting from restricted or project-based support to unrestricted, to accelerating payment schedules, and not holding grantees responsible for things that cannot come about now because of COVID and restrictions of people leaving their homes. So the importance about unrestricted is also in the way in their consideration for new grant making. And new grants will be as unrestricted as possible, but with a demonstration about how you're impacting basic community needs. They will reduce what they ask for from nonprofit partners, and that largely has to do with reporting or site visits or others. They want to contribute to community-based emergency response funds. That may be the Community Foundation, that may be the United Way. So you may want to think about how you are appealing for those funds through those type of organizations and not a particular foundation directly, unless they say, the door is open for consideration at this time. They want to communicate proactively and regularly about their decision-making process. They're committed to listening to their partners and continuing to adapt their guidelines as important. And in some cases, they will also give grants for advocacy for important public policy changes, so that healthcare is more equitable and emergency response is quicker. Many of these don't fund any type of advocacy because that can verge on a 501c4, but in this case, they are going to do that. And then they want to learn from these emergency practices and share what has been taught in this time to really look at their future philanthropy and their strategies for partnerships, alliances, and philanthropic support. So I think that we'll talk a little bit later about how things that are happening today impact us down the road when the COVID crisis is over. I think that this is an important one to know, particularly with your foundation or institutional funders. Next is don't be opportunistic, be authentic. And again, this is in good times or bad, but being authentic and genuine in the way you state your message and really what you do for your community and the impact that you have is particularly important. If your organization has services that are increasingly critical at this time, an appeal for those services is okay. With deference to the pandemic and the market, it's appropriate to move forward with those asks. I suppose many of you are like me. I'm receiving a lot of different solicitations for organizations now, and really looking at the messaging. And particularly with human services organization, obviously they have a very direct story to tell, and the impact that they are having in the community is very direct and important. But I see a lot of political messaging that comes out via email or other distribution methods that don't even acknowledge the current crisis that's going on. And it just seems so inappropriate and disrespectful. So yes, it's a political ad. They probably created it quite some time ago, but I think we have to be very careful about the nuancing of our messaging so that we are very authentic, and we're not opportunistic in the way we look at our fundraising. And don't make up reasons to raise money. I'm sure you don't do that, but in many cases there might be organizations that say we need to get on this bandwagon. People are starting to give. If there's an authentic reason to do so, sure. We have one former client I was talking about before, the youth services organization that deals with at-risk youth. And they did a brilliant message a couple of weeks ago. And they talked about when home is not a refuge. And so where we're all in our homes, where we all can't leave, well, that's where a lot of the trauma of their lives comes into play. So under the title of When a Home is Not a Refuge, they talked about what you can do to help at-risk youth today. Connect with one another intentionally and often. Look out for those in your community and donate. And when they talked about donate, it was to the organizations in our communities that are serving our vulnerable populations who will be hardest hit in the coming weeks and months. And they didn't say their organization's name. It was branded at the bottom, but when they talked about donate, it was to those organizations in our communities who serve vulnerable populations. I thought that was a brilliant message and very authentic in the way they talked about the challenges that their constituents are going to have and how you could support them through this, potentially through this organization or others. We have one client who is in a major capital campaign, and that campaign is for capital projects, building and interior projects. It is for programs and services. But once again, we're kind of setting the campaign to the side temporarily. And they are looking at, and in their case, they provide some services that are for adult learners. And we can talk about current use fundraising that is aligned with the current mission and community need and the campaign. So in essence, we're legitimately asking for resources that can be applied in the community now. And because of the consistency with mission, because of consistency with the goals of the campaign, it is in essence a way to cultivate donors in the future for that capital campaign. We have a couple of other clients who are doing the same, that are suspending or pausing, I think is a better word, a major campaign, focusing in on current use operational funding for program services operations. But again, aligning the message for that future consideration of a campaign gift, I think is particularly important. So I think that's good on that one. And again, we're working with a human services organization that is providing direct service to homeless. They also have a campaign on the horizon. They're not talking about the campaign certainly at all. So close the loop. If a major ask has been made, don't ignore it. I really believe that ambiguity is not comfortable and not good for a donor, just like it's not good for an organization. So if you have a major ask out there, I would say messaging around or messaging as follows for your prospects and donors is appropriate. You know, in light of the challenges before us, let's wait to discuss the proposal for 4 to 6 weeks, ideally allowing time for the challenges to pass. In the meantime, if you have questions or request further information, please let me know. It's acknowledging the fact that there's an outstanding ask. It's putting a time frame on there for continued communications. And it is leaving the door open for donations now if that person or institution wants to move forward with it. And I think leaving that door open is really important. And talking about the proposal and a target date for continued conversation is a way to reduce the ambiguity about an outstanding ask. Now, in some cases, we know that our donors are not thinking about their gifts to us at all. And you know, so this has to be nuanced to who your particular donors are. But again, I think closing the loop is an opportunity to lessen the ambiguity for them, for the organization, continue the dialogue, maybe not raise money right now, but to cultivate and engage prospects and donors for the future. Back to our senior citizen, our organization that works with senior citizens in the hospitals. They are calling every single one of their donors in their resident communities and outside in the general community and having really great conversations with them. And as you might guess, some of the stories are really heart-wrenching of, you know, senior citizens who are alone, locked in their homes now, who don't have any family. Their social network is their, you know, golf course or country club or, you know, their Starbucks. So their social network is not existing anymore. And so really the development officers of this organization are legitimately becoming their friends. They are offering, if those people need anything, to help triage that need out to an organization. So in some cases, they've delivered food to these people. Some cases they, you know, have bought them or arranged for other things that they may need. But as they were talking to one of their donors this week, the donor said, "Oh, well, this is the time of year that I usually my gift. So we should be talking about that too." Well, it wasn't the development officer's intention to have that conversation, but the donor wanted it, and she sent in her check for $10,000 for her usual annual contribution. So be disciplined now and be disciplined later. I think what we can do right now in a time where maybe we're not having such a level of personal interaction with our donors, we're communicating with them via email or phone, but there's time to be had and put to good work. So I think it's important at this time to use some of that time that you have to get your fundraising house in order. And that may mean things like policies and procedures, or getting your database up to date, looking at contact reports, looking at performance reporting, refreshing marketing materials, reviewing your fundraising plans or your communications plan. It's those things that often go to the bottom of the pile that get put to the bottom of the pile or the back burner as something else seemingly more important or critical comes about and transpires. But these aren't the fun things, but they are the critical things that lead us to good service to our prospects and donors, and therefore our communities, and I think, and also accountability to our prospects and donors, to our community. In our firm, we're a small firm of 15 people. The operations team met last week, and we talked about, okay, what are those things that always, again, get to the bottom of the pile? How can we address those over the course of anticipated next month or 6 weeks? And then also, what are those kind of process improvements that we could take on now that we have a little bit more time? And with one of our clients, we've completely shifted gears into what we're doing as their consultants, putting a campaign on pause, but are focusing in on prospect research, prospect screening, getting the database cleaned up, enhancing performance reporting, looking at their events, policies, and procedures and resources, updating marketing material, and in general policies and procedures related to data and information management and donor accountability are something that we're looking at. Next is be innovative. And at times of crisis, yep.
Can I pop in just for one moment? We do have a question, and someone just wants a clarification. Are you suggesting right now that organizations that don't provide human service, direct human services programs, but they have lost major revenue through event cancellations, are you suggesting that they do not conduct fundraising right now?
No, I think if the organization is threatened, if your basic operations are threatened, then you should have that conversation. And I frankly think everybody should be raising money or building prospect and donor relations right now. And if you're a cultural organization that maybe has lost a significant amount of revenue because you can't have audiences in the theater anymore, you want to sustain the organization. You have artists who are not being paid, other things like that. So get out there and raise money. So in terms of innovation, you may remember a lot happened to the nonprofit industry in 2008, 2009. We saw a lot of increased partnerships and alliances. There were new ways of serving, the public. There were new ways of communicating. It was about survival. Well, it's about survival again today. So in addition to continuing your fundraising and your consistent communications with your prospects and donors, leadership and constituents, look at how to provide your services. Look how to run your events. Look how you can use technology in a more effective way. Look at how you can work with employees who are working remotely, and maybe there are efficiencies in that. And take into consideration kind of the process model and the business model that you have to look for new ways to do business. So take some time to think, to watch, to evaluate. I'm evaluating a lot now about use of Zoom for client meetings. I used to spend probably about 40 to 50% of my on the road flying from client to client. Well, I am just as busy as if I were traveling because all of the the Zoom conferences or teleconferences that we're having to really keep our clients moving forward and helping them address their current needs as well as their longer needs. Take time to strategize. How often can you think big? Obviously, the current issues of the market and COVID may restrict some thinking, but this too will pass, and we need to think about what our future is. And take time to implement new process improvements. We have one client right now that we're in a strategic planning, we're doing strategic planning work with them, and we're also getting ready for a major feasibility study for a campaign. And in the process, we've really discovered that their business model is flawed, fundamentally flawed. And they have never taken the time to really address those issues. And this is the time we're going to do it, because their direct contact with their donors is less, their direct contact in their case in terms of the communities that they serve is less. So let's look at the fundamental business model of the organization to make it stronger, and have the discipline to move ahead with that now. And the final one is to celebrate resiliency and generosity. American donors are amazingly resilient. After the 2008-2009 Great Recession, philanthropy rebounded completely, quickly, and reached record heights. And that's going to happen again. So people want to continue to express their generosity through their philanthropy, but they also want to express their generosity through volunteering, through helping a neighbor, through communications with a friend in need. Now, we know that the personal contact can't happen, and it all needs to happen remotely, but there is resiliency and generosity that is out there, and I think we need to celebrate that. COVID is creating an interesting sense of community. And because in Arizona, we didn't have as tight of restrictions on being outside as you do in California, our neighborhood became really vibrant. People were out walking and biking, and you met people who you never ever met before, and neighbors were actually having conversations with appropriate social distancing, but they were having conversations. And I think that sense of community can be created within your organizations in a variety of different ways through the use of technology, or new technology or old technology of phones and other type of messaging. So I think let me go on to a couple of other points that I wanted to cover before I wrap it up and we open it up for questions. There's the government stimulus package that's out there, and I'm sure many of you are getting lots of information on it. Let me just share a couple of key points. As you may know, it temporarily suspends current AGI limits for charitable deductions for cash gifts made by individuals and businesses. It allows nonprofit organizations, including foundations with less than 500 employees, to access the $350 billion worth of loans for small business, some of which are going to be forgiven. It provides fully refundable tax credit for nonprofits, including foundations. And the checks and debit cards with the $1,200 taxpayer relief and $500 for each child for those families making less than $75,000 as an individual or $150,000 as a couple will be forthcoming. And there are other provisions to take into consideration, not only for your organizations, but as you consider your conversations with your prospects and donors. Also, there are a lot of scams out there. So I think it's really important as you are communicating with your prospects and donors, and particularly a more senior audience, is that you really work to assure them that you are not a part of a scam, that you are, ideally they already know who you are, but I think it's important to take that into consideration and know some people may be a little concerned about investing now. Be more focused on your donors than ever before. In 2008, 2009, what we told our clients is to hang on to your donors, communicate with them, steward them very, very closely and meaningfully, because the economy will rebound and they will be back. And I think we're in the same situation now. So that through that effective communication and appropriate engagement, whatever that may be, but effective stewardship and accountability is going to be really important to keep our prospects and donors close to us. And then I think finally, another point to consider is don't deny people the right or the opportunity to give. You know, I know many organizations who don't like to solicit their volunteers because they say their volunteers are giving with their time. It's inappropriate for us to ask them to give money as well. Some volunteers have significant wealth. They want to give. So why would you deny them to give, the opportunity to give? So as you talk to your constituents, your existing family of constituents, and maybe even a broader constituent group, those who are committed to your organization and not, donations may be the only way that they can activate their commitment to your organization at this time. So don't deny them the opportunity to do that, whether you're a cultural institution, whether you're a human services organization, whether you are an educational institution, or everything in between. It's time to ask people to give, because we do not want to deny people the opportunity to give if that's one way they can express their appreciation or affection for your organizations. So that's it.
We have a couple of questions that have been posed. First up, can you give a sense of what message can a nonprofit communicate if they believe they may have to close their doors soon?
And well, I know I can ask questions back. If you believe you're going to have to close your organization soon, and there's no way to quote unquote save the organization, I think, you know, to the degree that you are helping the people of the organization, whether it's your external market or your employees, and it's okay to ask for, you know, support for employees who are now unemployed, you know, so that the organization can continue to pay their employees for a period of time. So I think that, you know, again, if it seems a fait accompli, I would start talking about the people we serve and the people who have served this organization, and talk about that type of support if it's legitimate that you need that money. If you think that the organization is going to ultimately come back around, you know, and that there is a chance to, if enough contributions come together, that it could keep its doors open, you really have only one chance to use that kind of emergency opportunity. Donors aren't going to react to that type of message twice. So if you come from a position of concern and need, and if you talk about your basic survival is threatened right now, just remember you have one time to do it. Now, I've worked with plenty of organizations that take that chance and they're successful, because people do not want that institution to go away. So kind of think of what your messaging is based on what's going on with your organization and how, you know, and who your constituents are. And if they have enough to invest to keep you afloat, then structure it from a standpoint of resiliency and in terms of saving now, building for the future.
Okay, thank you for that. Next question we have is, we have restricted funds for a capital project that should really be slowed down. I would like to ask the donor to remove the restriction so that I can use the money to keep the organization above water during this time and once the virus is passed. Is that a reasonable ask?
Yes. We have a couple of different clients who are in the same situation. One where they got a $5 million $5 million gift for a capital project, and that donor put a challenge on the table to raise the remaining amount that is needed, and was going to actively participate in fundraising for that capital project, and is very, very, very committed to that capital project. But we need to go back to him and ask that his first pledge payment, which is $500,000, be reallocated to current use. And there are a couple other cases that we are doing the same thing. That happened a lot in 2008, 2009. It may mean, some donors will say, yes, you can reallocate the money, and then they'll make up the difference later. In some cases, they'll say, I've got X amount to invest. However you need to use it, you can do that, but you're not getting anything new. So you may have to raise more down the road a bit, but I think it's a real legitimate ask. They've already invested in your organization. Let's try to, build those resources for now to keep the organization afloat.
Thank you for that. One more question we have here is, can you clarify what you mean by accountability in terms of donor stewardship?
Well, accountability ultimately means that you are serving the donor's intent in a responsible way, and you are serving your community mission in a responsible way, and you are doing it in a manner that you can report back both to your donors and the communities how their investment was made and what results and impact that you have had. And accountability is financial measure. It's also impact measure, however you may do that. And it's also proactively reporting. Your foundations may ask for annual reports or semi-annual reports on the use of their money. You should be having that same kind of conversation with your individual and corporate donors as well. So it is about responsible use of the resources that they have invested in you.
All right. Next up, we have one that says they are a small but mighty nonprofit. Congratulations in their 27th year, but they've always struggled with keeping their heads above water and cultivating major donors, corporate sponsors, etc. Do you have any suggestions on how to target new places or new donors or businesses at this time?
I have to admit, I think it's going to be kind of difficult at this time. Because this is time, and you've heard me say it a number of times in this discussion, where it's important to keep your family close and how you can ask that family to invest now and later. So I think that may be a challenge. However, there are institutional funders, and this pledge that I read before from the Council on Foundations, they say that they are going to look at unrestricted funding for organizations that may not survive, that they normally would not fund. And that money, again, is unrestricted or used for current operations and can be used to sustain the organization or enhance service. So, again, if you have not been traditionally in their sector, this is an opportunity particularly to talk to foundations about support. And then as individuals, that's, I think, going to be a little bit tougher. But one thing you could probably do is to take into consideration your 6 degrees of separation. If this is the group that's traditionally supported you in the past, what is that next rung out in that 6 degrees of separation? Who do your current donors know? Who do your board members know? How could they help you be a part of that solution? So I think taking that into consideration as well as another opportunity.
Okay, and I don't see any more questions in the Q&A box. If anybody does have any, we'll kind of vamp for just a few minutes in case anybody has some. Please type it in the Q&A box. Richard, this has been absolutely insightful. Can you share any additional tips of just encouragement on the forefront for what we're looking forward to in the future?
I'd go back to a couple things that I said before. Genuine and not opportunistic. I think if you show genuine need, whether that's keeping your doors open, whether that is sustaining your employee base or compensating your employee base as some of them are furloughed or the amount of time that they're working goes down, you know, whether it is fundamentally keeping the lights on, or if it's enhanced service to the community because you serve an underserved population. I think an authentic discussion about what this means for your organization now and its future is really important. And I would also say, when in doubt, ask. Too often we try to sit in our offices and figure out what our donors are thinking. And you can ask them. And that's the best way to really understand how they want to be communicated with, if they want to be solicited now. Many of you have maybe heard the phrase, if you want advice, ask for money. If you want money, ask for advice. Well, advice is needed, money's needed, so you really do need both. But also you are looking at how to communicate with them in a way that, again, goes back to that authenticity and the genuine need that you have. And donors will tell you, prospects and donors will tell you what they want to do, how they want to do it. Don't sit and just brew it up yourself. Ask them how they want to be engaged and be able to react to them, you know, in the way that they want.
Thank you very much. Our next two questions are actually almost one and the same, and we will dive into it a little bit more on next Thursday's webinar. But Richard, if you would like to take a brief answer to this one, what is the role of the board versus the staff for a small organization during this current situation? And actually, the next one was really like how best to engage your board during this time.
Well, first of all, as executives of your organization, communicating with your board and not taking messaging to them for granted, I think is really important. But this is the time where your board needs to step up. I mean, if you look at what the real responsibilities of a board are about providing strategic direction for the future of the organization, about ensuring its financial viability and strength, you know, hiring and firing the CEO and being advocates and champions for the organization, you've got 3 of the 4 right there, and they need to step up. You need to help them step up if it's not that engaged of a board, but it's time to really ask them to step up. Can they step up in terms of enhanced contributions? Maybe. Can they step up in terms of their professional expertise and advice and counsel? Maybe. Do you need to brainstorm how to kind of rethink your business model and tighten the belt for the foreseeable future? And can they, you know, be a part of that discussion? Hopefully. Can they reach out to other people and institutions though they know who they ask for money and they've been really concerned about doing that before? Yes, I would hope so. So I think it's really critical. Use them as resources, use them as networks, and get them engaged, because if a board is ever supposed to be engaged and help the sustain an organization, that's now.
Thank you very much for that. And that actually was a great segue for me to wrap this all up. I think we answered all the questions that I see in the Q&A box, but if you have additional questions, you can email them over to info@tnpsocal.org. We will also be following up with every registered attendee with the video of this webinar, the resources that we'll be sending over, as well as an evaluation. And in that evaluation, you can input your questions if they're follow-ups to here, but also let us know what resources you're looking for, or if you have any other needs at this time. I wanted to put a plug in, first of all, for our Monday's webinar, which they are not on our calendar yet. They will be by the end of today, and we'll be sending out an email for that. Monday's webinar will feature Brian Yacker with YH Advisors, who will be covering or doing an overview of the new programs that were put in place to help get us through all of this pandemic at this point. So covering the Family Service Act, as well as, oh, I have my notes here and I can't even read them anymore. Family First Act, the Paycheck Protection Program, and the Economic Injury Disaster Loans. That will be Monday in the afternoon. And on Thursday, a wonderful segue to the last two questions here for Richard, we will be having a webinar on what your boards can be doing right now to support your organization through COVID-19 and beyond, really taking an assessment of what your boards can currently be doing or are able to do, and then how you can strategize a short-term plan going forward. That will be Thursday morning, so we'll have two webinars next week. I just want to say thank you again, Richard Tollefson of the Phoenix Philanthropy Group, for stepping in and helping to provide this invaluable information at this time for communication with your stakeholders. This was absolutely wonderful. We look forward to seeing you also again in June for our Giving USA program. And once again, thank you to our sponsors for our webinars, allowing us to provide these programs free for you, the Josephine S. Gunbinder Foundation, as well as the Port of Long Beach. So we thank you all. We hope that you are all safe and healthy and doing well during this time. We will look forward to seeing you online again in the future, and definitely seeing you in real life again very, very soon. So everybody stay well. Richard, thank you. And
thank you. Take care all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.